Sup everyone, welcome back to another video, and again I do apologize for the audio quality. I'm currently recording on my phone in just a very limited space with no audio dampening nor a computer available to edit my audio recordings afterwards. So hope you guys could understand, but I hope today you will be interested enough with the topic to kind of ignore the audio quality for the most part. Anyways, let's get started. Today we're talking about the Hydro Archon, furina, focalors, whichever one you want to call her by, but we want to deduce her abilities a little more. As we've been able to play now with the Hydro MC, I'm sure everybody have some ideas here and there about what the Hydro Archon is going to do. Some good, some bad. Some people are thinking maybe she's not going to be as broken as we all thought she was going to be. I don't think it's news to anybody to now look at the Hydro MC to try and deduce the Hydro Archon, as the MC has been through many regions at this point, and in every iteration of those regions, the MC has kind of just been a tuned down version of what the Archons eventually became. So looking at the Hydro MC, I think it's not going to be any stretch of the imagination to say that the Hydro Archon is going to be a version of the Hydro MC that is literally kind of on crack. So let's start with general theme. It seems like hoyoverse has become fixated on this exchange concept where you kind of give something to get something back. Now, this has maybe thematics, duality to the justice system or being the land of justice. When you think about symbolisms, oftentimes you'll think about the lady who's holding a book on one hand and a scale on the other hand. And that scale represents balance, and balance represents an exchange. If one thing gives, the other one has to take. So going off of that concept, it seems like the Hydro Archon will have some sort of exchange in her skill kit somewhere. Currently, it seems like it's going to be an exchange of your HP in exchange for maybe some sort of buff, power, or I don't know. If it's very straightforward, it's just use your HP to launch a powerful skill. Although I don't think that's very likely. The reason being is that just think about the complexity of Nahida's kit. Now, if you're going to say it's very complex, it's not that complex, but you're going to say it's as simple as click this button, get this result. It's also not quite that simple. Now, of course, there's a whole layer of Dendro being an added element to Nahida's arrival. The actuality of Nahida's complexity has been elevated due to Dendro still being very new at the time. Now, Hydro is not a new element. How is focalors supposed to interact with other characters from other elements is going to be a key factor we have to take into account for when deducing her skill kit. You want a skill kit as a Hydro Archon to have good application or decent application. Now, this is the tricky part. If we want to talk about application, we then have to talk about characters like Xingqiu, we have to talk about characters like Yelan. Are we realistically looking at a situation where you're going to make another Hydro character that is focused around application and damage? That's why I think when we come to the Hydro Archon, there may be an aspect to her being a more supportive character in the sense that maybe she leverages more power back into your on-field character as opposed to being a supportive DPS character. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean the Hydro Archon cannot deal damage. I'm simply saying that there's a huge aspect of her kit that is likely going to end up being exchanging her something to give you back something. Now, if we're thinking about this like kind of a formula thing, right? Like, so let's lay it out. What does she give up and what does she give back? So with all Hydro characters released in the last little while, the vast majority of them has some sort of HP scaling, which has led me to think that it's almost unrealistic to say that the Hydro Archon won't have anything to do with HP. She definitely has something to do with HP. We just don't know where. So let's put HP somewhere in this formula. So she either gives up HP or she either gives you HP. So it's one of these things. I think HP is somewhere here. And I'm willing to put it more towards the side of giving up her HP rather than giving you HP. The reason being is giving you HP can come in many different ways. So like it can be seen as healing you, it can be seen as increasing your max HP, which for some characters means increasing their damage, right? So there's definitely value to increasing your max HP. However, it's not as universal. Another thing we have to realize for Archon is they're very universal characters. Like they're just expansive and has such a wide coverage. The main reason being is that Hoyoverse designs these characters to be able to interact with as many in their specialty as they can. And they want these characters to have value inherently with these properties. So buffing HP, while it's good for some characters, it's not going to be nearly as good for a lot of the other characters. Hence why I think if HP is in the formula, it's going to be in the form of taking as opposed to in the form of giving. So now let's just stick HP on the left side, right? So the Hydro Archon sacrifices HP. Now, what does she give back? This is the tricky part. So in the process of sacrificing HP, there might be some other Hydro application, there might be some sort of taunt, there might be even summoned units, who the hell knows? But there's gonna be an ability either in her elemental skill or her burst skill that she now gives up a part of her HP, but in return your whole team gets some sort of buff. What is this buff going to be? An overall damage buff is the first thing that jumps out at most people, and of course myself as well. But if you think about it, an overall damage buff is great, amazing, everybody would love it, every DPS would be able to use it, just like Yelan. So then are we going to take the basis of what Yelan's burst does and now apply it to focalors' elemental skill, right? Because we're thinking maybe this is going to be an elemental skill. This is an interesting concept because Yelan's current burst skill, very few people are actually using it for the ramping damage buff. And with the way it's designed, it's not really that noticeable for most characters. Like, I mean, you can definitely notice it, but it's not something that you're playing Yelan for, if that makes sense. You're playing Yelan for her insane off-field DPS and support capabilities, as well as her Hydro application to then create a more consistent DPS environment. So I don't think focalors' elemental skill is going to be like as good as Yelan's burst skill in terms of off-field DPS and Hydro application. However, I do think there's going to be elements of Hydro application and an overall damage buff in conjunction with the Hydro application is going to give a good amount of utility for her elemental skill, both in Hydro application as well as a good amount of buff in exchange for her HP, and comes with a bit of damage. The key thing to be careful about when we're talking about an elemental skill in this manner is that we need to be aware of how the buff is applied to your character. So for example, if you're playing the Hydro Archon and you also have an off-field DPS, let's say you're playing Hydro Archon and Yelan, and you give this buff to the whole team, does Yelan's off-field DPS also get buffed, or is it only for the on-field character? Because remember, when we say we buff the whole team, we can say, okay, the whole team is buffed, but the buff is only active when the character is on field. Is that still buffing the whole team? Or is that only buffing the on-field character? Making a clear distinction between the two is going to make or break this character's elemental skill, because imagine if it buffs your entire team, regardless if they're on-field or off-field. That is a far more significant buff than just buffing the on-field character. Now, of course, hoyoverse being hoyoverse, there's a likelihood that something like this might end up in the Constellations. Let's say her C1 takes this buff and applies it to the whole team, or her C1 increases the duration of the buff and the effectiveness of the buff for every whatever that you have on your team, or for whenever you have more HP past a certain breakpoint, this buff becomes insanely overpowered or gains new abilities. Now, with the Hydro Archon, if she's giving HP, there needs to be a creative way to, I believe, replenish that HP. So currently, right now, I'm not really sure how they're going to do that, because it feels counterintuitive to then have her HP just bleed away and eventually she will die, and without any ways to replenish that. So I don't know if they're going to build a replenish mechanic within the elemental skill, or they're going to redirect that into her burst skill and allowing her kit to flow together a little better. Get it? Flow, Hydro. Anyways, talking about her burst skill, if the elemental skill is a buffing ability, the burst skill likely will lean a little more towards damage, because look at all the Archons. Yes, most of them are supportive characters. Even Raiden, who is known as an insane DPS unit in the game, still has great supportive capabilities. I think support and DPS should go hand in hand with these characters. There should be no Archon that is solely focused on one and is enabled to do the other one. So with focalors now kind of mostly having support covered, we have to look at DPS options. When we look at DPS, there's only two options: sustained DPS or burst DPS. In some cases, we can have both. For example, Zhongli is considered to be a burst DPS with his burst skill coming down in one instant and just chunking the enemy. Now, some would argue, well, his elemental skill is sustained DPS. No, the vast majority of his damage is coming from his burst, hence he is a burst DPS. Raina Shogun is half and half. She has that instance of burst and she has sustained DPS. Hence why she's more thought of as a DPS unit as opposed to a support unit. And then we have Nahida, who has very good sustained DPS and good duration of her elemental skill is the key to sustaining that DPS all throughout the fight for her. And if you want Nahida to do a huge chunk of damage, she's not able to, right? That's why she's more of a sustained support DPS. What about focalors? I think if Hoyoverse wants focalors to be completely and utterly broken, they should just go full sended on a hybrid, kind of like a Raiden Shogun thing, but flip it back into the support. So think about it like this. Raiden Shogun has sustained DPS and burst DPS, and she's a DPS character. Now, focalors can be a sustained DPS and a burst DPS, but she's funneled more towards a support, if that makes sense. Is that making sense for you guys? So I think focalors as a character is going to have more damage potential than Zhongli and Venti. Maybe around the damage capability of Nahida, a little bit higher. However, she's tunneled more back into the supportive role because it also fits her personality. As you guys have seen her, she's kind of more in the background. She doesn't really come to the front. She sits back and she enjoys the show, but then she adds elements here and there to spice things up. So taking this idea, focalors is probably going to stay kind of off the battlefield. She will take the field for sure, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, she's going to stand back. She's going to provide you with things that you need to make this fight more interesting, more engaging, and it's going to help you a lot. But at the same time, she is going to be looking at it from afar and enjoying the show. So now taking that idea and pushing it further leads me to think that her burst skill likely is going to have an on-field effect. Either she's going to come on the field and deal a massive amount of damage, apply Hydro, and then, I don't know, leave it a taunt or something like that, or some sort of summon, or I don't know. The summon might be going too far here, but leaving behind something and then she's able to get off the field. So think Xingqiu, think Yelan, but less damage and more support. So going in the direction of a taunt, that's where I thought, while also having Hydro application. So leaning more towards someone like Kokomi, but more damage because she does upfront damage and then continued sustained Hydro application, as well as maybe a very, very good sizable taunt area to help you group enemies. Because let's be quite real, taunting is a form of CC because all the enemies then start gathering towards that one spot, and maybe focalors might have the strongest and most durable taunt in the game, able to help you keep big monsters that usually break these taunts in like 2-3 hits, able to lock them down, keep them in place, keep you away from harm's way, and allow your DPS with her elemental skill buff to whack on them for free. Because think about it, taunt is the most broken thing in the game in terms of CC nowadays if the taunt is durable enough. And hopefully focalors, being the brat she is able to taunt the enemies to an extent that they will want to whack the living daylights out of her, but of course they're not going to get that chance. What do you guys think focalors is going to do? Comment down below and let me know what you think. Until next time, urge you to stay safe. Peace, bye.